Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah, and today's podcast we're going to do a little injury update out west, then check in with another team in the west who has been struggling lately. We'll then throw it over to the Eastern Conference, where two teams have had better fortune than the West Conference teams. And then we'll talk some historic games and performances before we end the show on some rankings. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Big injury update happening in the Western Conference. Luka Doncic goes down with an ankle injury. I know that Dallas Mavericks fans definitely held their breath on this one because we talked about in the last podcast, Luka Doncic is the star player, the franchise player for the Dallas Mavericks, and to see your star player go down with an injury like this is definitely a scary sight to see. It was very, very early on against the Heat. Less than 2 minutes into the game, Doncic was driving to the basket, and he stepped on Kendrick Nunn's foot, and he tweaked his ankle. He couldn't even get up to go back on defense. He kind of just fell out of bounds and went directly to holding his ankle. He was holding pretty high up his ankle too, which could be more of a concern if it's a high ankle sprain. He immediately went to the locker room, of course, because they had to check on him right away, make sure that everything's okay. So they did x-rays right away, and everything came back negative. So, it sounds like he's only going to be gone for about 2 weeks. So that is a huge bullet dodged for the Dallas Mavericks. They can definitely take a sigh of relief after this one. Just a little reminder, Luka Doncic is a fantastic, phenomenal player. He was Rookie of the Year last year. He's an MVP candidate, as we broke down in the last podcast. I had him at number 2 in my rankings. This year, he's averaging 29.3 points per game, 9.6 rebounds per game, and 8.9 assists per game as of right now. So that's almost a triple-double he's averaging. He's having a historic year. And he's not even averaging the most points in the league right now, but 29.3 is pretty high. So it is impressive stuff, definitely. He leads the league as well with 8 triple-doubles. So to be in your second year in the NBA and have already found out how to be successful definitely speaks to the type of player that Luka Doncic is, just his IQ for the game and his craftiness, his ability. Not pure athleticism because he's not a super athletic guy, but he just finds a way to be productive. But unfortunately, he will be sidelined for at least 2 weeks. And this is really unfortunate as well because he had a 41-point game in a win against Detroit before this happened. This game was also played in Mexico, and fun fact, he scored the first ever triple-double in Mexico. So his name will forever be in history because of that. He also had a streak going on of consecutive games where he had 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists. That's going to end at 20. Because of the injury, so he couldn't continue the game, and now his streak has ended, which is a really unfortunate way for him to go down because he has been so consistent, and to have 20 games in a row where you are that productive, have 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists, it doesn't happen often. And to put it in perspective, he passed Michael Jordan's streak, and the only other player with a longer streak was Oscar Robertson. So to be in the company of Michael Jordan and Oscar Robertson is rare company, and it's definitely a good sign, especially since Luka Doncic is only 20 years old. So for him to be this good this early is definitely a good sign for the Dallas Mavericks, especially if Porzingis starts turning into the player he once was and once looked to be at some point. Before this injury even happened, though, Luka Doncic has been leading the Mavericks to a season that not a lot of people expected. They expected the Mavericks to be around the playoff picture, but definitely not breaking into it as much as they have. I mean, they were in second place the last podcast I did. I think now they've dropped a bit because teams are starting to pick up their pace in the Western Conference for sure. But they had won 11 out of their last 13 games, so I think that's a really great feat for them. They did end up losing that game in OT because Luka Doncic went down, and he's their main distributor on offense. He's their main go-getter, the point getter, and so when that piece of your offense is taken out of it, it messes up the whole rhythm of your team. So it was definitely difficult for them to try and find any grasp. They did almost come back in the game. They forced OT, but they couldn't get the win in the end. So it is unfortunate for the Mavericks. They do go down. They do lose their star player, and it only gets tougher from there because now they're going on the road. And it's a tough road trip for them. They're playing the Milwaukee Bucks, who are first in the East. They're going to have to go up against Giannis Antetokounmpo, the MVP of last season, the looking like going to be back-to-back MVP for this season. And it would have been a great matchup to see. I mean, the two people that most people have in their power rankings as 1 and 2 for the MVP race, it would have been a fantastic matchup to see how they, would go after each other and see, potentially a playoff picture game. You never know if the Mavericks could squeak in there. I mean, I don't really see it happening, but it's cool to talk about for sure. And I think it would have been a great contest, a good way to measure up who deserves the MVP more, who carries their teams in big games. But now Luka is going to miss that game. It's going to be even tougher for the Mavericks to try and, come back and play this Bucks team that's been playing so well without their star player. After the Bucks, they take on the Celtics, who are just as hard as a matchup. The Celtics are doing fine in the East as well. They're definitely up there in the rankings right now. They're starting to find their rhythm. They got Kemba Walker. They got Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They have a lot of great pieces that's going to make it tough on them for sure to try and win that game. And then after the Celtics, it doesn't get any easier for them at all because they have to play the 76ers, who have been playing really well as of late. They're in third right now in the Eastern Conference just because they have one more loss than the Miami Heat do. But they do have a record of 20-8, and they've started to find their rhythm. They're actually 8-2 in their last 10 games as well, which is a really impressive feat. And they just lost a game not because Joel Embiid was out, but I mean that obviously plays a factor if Joel Embiid is a big part of the 76ers organization and their team, and his impact on the floor, of course. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, and then after the 76ers, the Mavericks have to go up against the defending world champions, the Toronto Raptors, who have still been respectable in the East. They've been playing really well. Pascal Siakam still has them competitive, as well as Kyle Lowry and other pieces as well. They're fifth in the East right now on 17-8, 6-4 in their last 10. So they're not as dangerous this year, and that one might be winnable, even without Luka Doncic. But that stretch of games playing top Eastern Conference teams, I mean, all of those teams are 1-5 in the East, so it's really difficult road trip for them for sure. The good news for the Mavs is that they did come back from 24 down to force OT against the Heat after losing Luka Doncic. They did end up losing, which is kind of deflating, especially after making a comeback like that, but it definitely shows signs that they can do it without Luka if they apply themselves and if they get the right, impact from players like JJ Barea, who's definitely going to get some more playing time now that he's going to have to be the guy, playing point guard. And then Jalen Brunson as well, coming off the bench. He's going to have to step up as well. The whole team just has to function a little bit differently because they look to Luka to orchestrate everything, and he's the type of guy that can do that. He can find pockets of space and distribute to his teammates and grab the boards and run the offense and run the game. But without them, they're going to have to play a more team-oriented style. They're going to have to figure out, how they're going to get their buckets and where they're going to get them. But It's not impossible, and it's bad fortune for the Mavs, especially with the schedule that they face. And losing an MVP caliber superstar is definitely not helpful at all. They were climbing high in the Western Conference, but it could be worse. And we will talk about another team in the West who is struggling even more than the Mavericks. So stay with us.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Dallas Mavericks have suffered an unfortunate injury and the fact that they will have to face some tough Eastern Conference teams without their star, Luka Doncic. Now we're going to talk about some misfortune for the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans just set a franchise record, not in a good way, with their 12th straight loss. It's definitely tough for any team to go on a losing streak like this, but 12 straight loss and setting a franchise record as well it just makes it that much harder. And this is a team that really hit the reset button, especially when Anthony Davis, their former franchise player, kind of forced his way out of New Orleans. He kind of stopped trying, kind of stopped playing, really spoke to the fact that he wanted to leave, wanted to go to the Lakers. So they were holding out on him, and they really hit the reset button and overcame the big trade, the big picks. Lonzo, Josh Hart, and Ingram came from the Lakers. And big news, they got the lottery pick somehow, some way, and they drafted Zion. But unfortunately for the New Orleans Pelicans, he's been hurt all year, and they haven't really pushed him to come back anytime soon just because they don't want to rush anything. They're not really pushing for anything right now, especially the way that they've been playing. They've dropped real low into the Western Conference. I believe they're second to last now in the West. So it's really unfortunate for them. And it's kind of shocking to see how poor they've been. I mean, even without Zion, a lot of people hail this team as maybe slipping in kind of under the radar into the 8th seed, the 7th seed maybe. They have enough talent to do so. I mean, the players I mentioned, Lonzo, he can definitely bring something more to the team. I think he still hasn't broken out to be the player that a lot of people expected him to be. Yes, we know that he's got great handles, he's got great vision, and his passing ability is fantastic, but his jump shot is still broke. They've tried to fix it since he got into the league, but he still struggles for shooting the ball. And if you're in the NBA and you can't shoot the ball, that is a big problem. And so he's got to be more productive on the offensive end, not just assist-wise. He needs to put up numbers. He needs to score points. He is pretty good defensively, maybe a little overrated, but he definitely can bring more to the team. Josh Hart, he's a good little player as well. He can bring buckets sometimes, but I just think his consistency is what hurts him. And then Brandon Ingram, people have compared him to Kevin Durant. I don't really see this comparison other than the fact that he's kind of tall and lanky too. Ingram shows flashes of scoring high volume points, but he hasn't done it consistently enough for me. He's definitely not aggressive enough. He's got the 3 ball. He can go inside and he can finish off the glass pretty well. But those 3 definitely underwhelming for sure. They have other pieces as well. Drew Holiday is a really good player. He's been in the league for a while. He's pretty much the head of the snake for the Pelicans right now. He's the leader. They also have J.J. Redick, who's a great catch and shoot shooter, which I think they need with as many people who can handle the ball on the team I mean, we just talked about Alonzo. You know, he's the point guard. He's got the vision and the passing ability. Drew Holiday as well. He can find open shooters as well. And so you need a guy like JJ Redick. His numbers have gone down a lot. I think he's only averaging about 5 points per game at this point. But even still, he is a veteran guy on a team that's pretty young. And so I think it's very valuable to have him. Even if you need a quick bucket, I think he can provide that. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the history of the game, I think, in my opinion. They also have this kid named Jackson Hayes who has astounded a lot of people with his high-flying ability. He can really dunk. Jahlil Okafor, who was on the 76ers, was supposed to be a big, grand talent. He hasn't really produced what a lot of people had expected him to do, but he definitely has a lot of potential as well. And then Derek Favors, I think, is another good piece, another good element. He's just a veteran guy that knows how to work the game. He's got a great mid-range jumper. And so, you know, this team rounds out pretty nicely. It doesn't... If I look at this roster and I see that they're on a 12-game losing streak, I would be shocked. In fact, I am shocked. So it's really surprising to see. And their record loss came against Orlando, 130-119. Let me say that again. They lost to Orlando, 130-119. The Magic are not that good, especially on the road. The Pelicans were home for this game that they dropped. Orlando's 4-8 on the road. But I think the biggest problem that the Pelicans have is that they cannot defend. I mean, during this losing streak, they're 29th in defense, and they give up an average of 121.4 points per game. If you give up 121 points, that means your offense has to score 122 points to win the game. That's a lot of points. That's very difficult to do. So if you have your opponent's average points being that high, you're not really giving yourself a chance. You're losing, and they're also losing by 12 points per game on average during this stretch. So they're really just, at this point, just not competing because they have the talent to do so. Any team in the NBA on any given day can win a game, but it just depends on how locked in they are and how together they are. And I think Drew Holiday also touched on this as well after their record loss. He said that sometimes they just don't finish out games. Brandon Ingram talked on this as well. They just don't finish out games together. They need to stay together more. They need to ride out these stretches where, you know, a team is going to go on a 10-0 run, but how do you respond? And I think they don't really respond. Once they go down, they don't really find a way to fight back in. And basketball is a game where teams are going to go on runs, and if you don't, you know, have a response to a team after they go on a 10-0 run, you're going to lose games because once you fall behind, you got to find a way to make a run of your own, try and take back the lead little by little, but the Pelicans just haven't found a way to do that. Next up, they face a Nets team who has kind of been up and down this year. A lot of question marks surrounding this team, especially because Kevin Durant is out for the entire year, and Kyrie's been out with some injuries here and there as well. So there's not a lot of expectations for the Brooklyn Nets as of yet. There definitely will be next year, but they're still holding down pretty decently. They just got a really big win over the 76ers. The 76ers have been playing really well, so for them to pull out a win is very, very impressive. So yeah, they play a Nets team that's, like I said, been up and down this year, have had some injuries, don't have their two star players, but they still have some good pieces in Prince. Allen's pretty good as well. Spencer Dinwiddie, Temple, and Joe Harris as well, pretty decent. So they got a pretty good squad. They got DeAndre Jordan coming off the bench as well. So they've kind of rebuilt their squad. But in order for the Pelicans to even try and get out of this stretch of games, they have to find a new sense of foundation where they can rely on each other and try and find a way to win, because right now, when you're in a losing streak like this, it's tough. It's tough to even try and get up and get motivated for a game because, you know, you kind of get used to losing in a way. I know that these are NBA caliber players, but when you're losing and you're down and have lost 12 in a row, it's tough. It's really tough. But I think if they come with the right motivation, they can definitely steal one from the Nets. They're not that good. Like I said, they're sitting in 7th in the East. So they really just need to find a way to come up big and get the win. So yeah, the Nets are sitting in 7th right now in the East. There's probably no chance that they catch up to number 1 spot because this team has been playing out of their mind. Up next, we break down the Milwaukee Bucks and their season so far. Stay with us.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. We just talked about the misfortunes of the New Orleans Pelicans. They're having a rough go as of late. They've lost 12 in a row, and they just can't seem to find a win. But another team sliding over to the East Coast, who have had very different fortune this year, is the Milwaukee Bucks. And last podcast, I was talking about how the Lakers have been dominant. They've been the best team in the league. But I'm switching sides. I'm choosing the Milwaukee Bucks as the best team in the league, and I've been sleeping on them. And everyone else has too. So, their last game, they won against the Cavs, 125-108. Big deal. They beat the Cavaliers. Whatever. No, it's a big deal. And I'll tell you why. They beat the Cavs, who aren't that good. And their best player is Kevin Love. He wants out. He wants to be traded. So, obviously, it's not a great situation in Cleveland. It is a rebuilding year for the Cavs because they have a bunch of young pieces. And they have a young coach who just came up from the college game. So, this is kind of his first shot at the big leagues, which is probably why Kevin Love wants out. He doesn't want to rebuild. He wants to play now. Nevertheless, their greatness stretches much farther than just their last game. This has been a year of dominance, and I'll tell you why. The versatility on offense is ridiculous because they can do it all. They can stretch the floor and find shooters and move the ball around really well. They can also go inside because of how big they are. I mean, they have both Lopez brothers and Giannis, so that should tell you something. They can go inside. They can shoot from outside. They got Middleton. They got Bledsoe. And they're just a really long team. Like I said, they have Giannis and they have both Lopez's. And I think one of their biggest attributes is their points in transition because they can go and run. They play the fast break really well. They've been putting up numbers this year. They're number one in the league with an average point per game of 121.2. That is insane. If you're scoring 121 points per game, you're bound to win because that just means you have to stop the other team from scoring more than 121, and most teams probably won't do that. So this is why they've been so dominant. They also have a win margin of victory with a whopping plus 13.6. So they're not just winning and beating their opponents, they are destroying their opponents. It's not even fair. And I mean, we talked about it last podcast. Giannis is in MVP form. He is just a generational talent. He's a guy that comes around once in however long. But I haven't seen a player as dominant as him come into the league this young, probably since LeBron James. And they're just a little bit different in the way that they play. Giannis is kind of more of a brute player that just goes to the baskets and dominates his opponents. And he's just so long and has so much ability to him as well. He's just a great leader for this Milwaukee Bucks team. He can go up and get blocks. He gets steals. He finds a way to get to the basket. He's kind of started to implement three, not too much, but he does have it in his arsenal now. And he's a playmaker too, which for his size is pretty impressive. So they've got a great guy leading the Milwaukee Bucks to this great record. And he's also got great pieces around him as well. Chris Middleton, who got his first All-Star appearance last year, had a really good year last year. And he also got a big contract extension that a lot of people have doubted. They didn't really think that he deserved it after just 1 year. They thought maybe, he was a one-hit wonder. But he's backing it up. He's playing pretty well this year. He's a really good shooter. He contributes for sure. Giannis obviously is the face of it, but Middleton is a great sidekick for sure. And he finds ways to score as well. I think he's averaging about 18.5 points per game. And he's just a reliable scorer when the team needs him. Another great player that, is on the team as well is Eric Bledsoe, who's always been a really good explosive guard. I think he hasn't really ever gotten his opportunity to be great on a team. And he doesn't necessarily have a big role on the Bucks, but he does provide that spark that they need at times. Eric Bledsoe, I believe, was on the Suns at one point, and he wanted out, wanted to move, ended up here at the Bucks, and now he's in a great situation to be successful. And I think he's always been a guy that's just been on the low, a really good player that's just reliable. He's pretty good defensively too, so he's definitely a key factor to this team's success. He's also above his career averages in points per game, assists per game, and rebounds per game. So not all career huge numbers, but he's efficient, and that's exactly what you need when you're trying to build a championship team, especially around a big star that you already have in Giannis Antetokounmpo. George Hill, another good guard who is a veteran. He's been on a bunch of teams. He also was on the Cavaliers trying to push them to an NBA championship, so he has that playoff experience, and he's had that experience to be in the league this long to where he knows how to play in his role and also know how to, lead a team and teach them what they need to learn to be successful farther on into the playoffs. So I think that's invaluable that a lot of people just don't really notice sometimes. Another guy that's a veteran is Kyle Korver, and his numbers have definitely gone down this year. But he's like JJ Redick. He's a spot-up shooter, one of the best three-point shooters in the game, in the history of the game. And so sometimes when they need a bucket, they need to throw out to shooters. They got Kyle Korver, and he's definitely still lethal. Dante DiVincenzo, he's made strides after only playing 27 games last year. He's kind of looking like he could be, a potential star. Not a star, but a good role player for this team. And like I said before, they have both Lopez brothers, and they were, they're players that can be potentially two of the better centers in the league in a centerless league at this point. I mean, now it's all about stretch fives, and Brooks kind of changed his game in order to fit that motto of the NBA that we've become accustomed to seeing. And so he's kind of added in his three-point shooting ability as well. And he's definitely the better of the two brothers. He starts, he gets more numbers and more rebounds and all of that. But overall, they just have really good pieces, and they've built up a lot of chemistry. This team's been pushing together for a minute now, and they just keep adding in new elements that keep making them better. And they are coming off a very disappointing loss last year. A lot of people thought they were going to go on to the NBA championship, especially after winning the East. Kawhi Leonard and the Raptors obviously had something different to say about that, and I think that's just because they got stuck in their half-court offense, and they couldn't just go to Giannis at any point because Kawhi was shutting him down. But now, this year, the Bucks are so versatile on offense that they don't have to play just the half-court game. They can play all over the court. They can run the fast break. They can go in. They can go out. Like I said before, they just have so many ways to find the basket that it's become impossible to stop them, which is why they're averaging as many points per game as they are. And they're also on an 18-game winning streak right now. This is the second longest in their franchise history. Their longest in franchise history is 20 games, and that's in the 70s. And when they went on that 20-game win streak in the 70s, they ended up going on to win an NBA championship. So it is possible that now that they're going on their new 18-game winning streak and counting, that maybe this could be foreshadowing something even greater. Can the Milwaukee Bucks make it all the way to the championship and win it all? I think it's definitely possible. They're number one in my power rankings now. But yeah, they've also won 22 of their last 23 games, which is really impressive, especially in a league where, like I said before, any team can win on any given day, but they've just been that good and that consistent. They're tied for the best record in the NBA right now with the Los Angeles Lakers, but they've just seemed a little more impressive, but kind of on the low. Lakers have that razzle-dazzle, that Showtime magic that everyone gravitates towards because LeBron's there and Anthony Davis is there and because it's the Lakers. Milwaukee Bucks, no one really talks about them. But Giannis is making them relevant. They're making them the new face of the NBA right now. In my opinion, they are the best team in the NBA at this moment. This definitely seems like the year they make the leap to the championship. They do have a slight problem as of right now with Eric Bledsoe going down injured, but he's only out 2 weeks with a right fibula avulsion fracture. That was difficult to say. But yeah, he's only out 2 weeks, so they can definitely fill in for him until he gets back. This team, like I said, is so versatile, finds so many different ways to score, and have been so dominant that losing just one player, I think they should be all right. And they've been rolling. But they're not the only ones making noise in the Eastern Conference. We talk about trusting the process after this.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We were just talking about the Milwaukee Bucks and how they probably are the best team in the NBA right now. They have the best record, or at least tied with the LA Lakers. They've been very consistent on an 18-game winning streak right now, won 22 of their last 23 games, so they're definitely on a roll. And another team that has been making noise in the Eastern Conference is the Philadelphia 76ers. They've been very, very good this year, and I haven't heard a lot of buzz about them, so it's kind of interesting to see. They currently sit in third in the East and have a 20-8 record, like I stated before earlier in the podcast. They did just lose to the Nets in very rough fashion. They got smashed 109-89, but they were without Joel Embiid due to an upper respiratory illness. Hopefully it's nothing too serious. He'll probably be back soon. But it's a big loss for the 76ers when Joel Embiid's not playing, because he's a big piece of their offense, a big piece of their defense as well too. He leads the team in points per game and rebounds per game with 22.8 and 12.3 respectively. So it's definitely hard to fill that void, especially because he's a center. He's your guy. He's your anchor, basically. He's holding down the team on defense, shot blocking. And then he's a very good post-up guy and a guy to play off of. He's a good screener. So without him on the floor, it definitely hurts, and definitely hurts their offensive flow. But despite this loss, they have been really good. They were 8-2 in their last 10 games. And during that stretch, they beat the Pacers, who have been a really good team this year. A lot of people sleep on the Pacers each and every year, and somehow they managed to be good. I mean, after Victor Oladipo went down, I thought, the Pacers would probably be towards the back end of the conference, but no, they're still relevant. They have Brogdon, who has 19.5 points per game, 7.7 assists per game, who's been playing extremely well. Jeremy Lamb as well had 14.9 points per game, I believe. TJ Warren has 18.2 points per game. And Sabonis has 18 points per game. And then they also have Miles Turner as well coming off the bench. So that's a pretty good squad. And I think that the Pacers can surprise a lot of people this year and be a really dangerous team. So for the 76ers to beat them is definitely impressive. They also beat the Jazz, who I think should be a great team this year. They have a lot of good pieces, and they've just been underwhelming. I think the issue is, especially Mike Conley. People expected a lot of things from him getting traded from the Grizzlies. He's always been a staple there in Memphis and, kind of a lone star. He did have Marc Gasol with him before Marc Gasol left. But Mike Conley was always a really good point guard that people hailed, deserved better. And so now he's in a better situation with the Jazz, and he's been very underwhelming. But they also have good players in Rudy Gobert, who I think could be one of the best centers in the league if he, is just a little more aggressive, a little more consistent. I think Donovan Mitchell as well could be a huge star in this league. After his rookie year, he kind of flatlined, not a lot of buzz around him anymore. But he definitely has the potential to be a star. He's got all kinds of facets of his game that would make him dangerous, especially the fact that he's as aggressive as he is. I think he's a more controlled Russell Westbrook because he can go up and dunk on people, and he can shoot from the outside as well, but he's just not as rash as Russell Westbrook is, which I think is good. It's a good quality to have. They also have Ingles as well, who's just a great three-point shooter. I don't know how Ingles is so good at basketball. He just doesn't look like he should be, but he is. So the Jazz are a really good team as well. And then they also had a 3-game stretch where they beat Toronto, the defending champions, who are still playing really well. We talked about it earlier. They also beat Denver from the Western Conference, who is a really young team. We talked about them last podcast. Harris, Murray, Jokic, who also has been very underwhelming this year as well. He's nowhere near the form that he was in last year, where people were calling him the best center in the league. He's definitely not playing up to his standard. But the Denver Nuggets are still a great team, and the 76ers beat them, and then they also beat Boston, which, like I said before, is another team that should be really good. And, 76ers are just rolling over these teams, and they went on this streak where it seemed like they couldn't lose. And it's because they have great pieces on their team. Ben Simmons is in his 3rd year in the NBA. He is in a career low for points and rebounds right now, but he does have a high in assists and steals. So I think that he needs to find his offensive productivity a little more, especially, compare him to Alonzo Ball, because these two have been compared in the past based on the way that they play. They're both pass-first type of players, but in this type of NBA, you need to have productive point guards, and if you're going to play the point, you need to be productive on the offensive end, and he needs to find ways to get to the basket more. He also added a three-point shot. He hasn't used it that much, but when he does, it does seem to go down a lot more than it had in years past. He wouldn't even shoot it before because he didn't have a really good jump shot. He was more of a drive and kick type of player, drive and lay it in. That's how he would find his points, but he can shoot the three now. I think it's just now about finding more confidence and finding his shot and just finding ways to impact the team other than just setting up your teammates. You have to find the basket yourself as well. Also, his pace, his vision, his passing, and he's just a big guy. I think this is what makes him so valuable. The fact that he's such a big guy but has so much ability and technique, it just makes him really dangerous. They also have Josh Richardson, who's having a really good year, his 2nd highest points per game total in his career right now with 14.9 points per game. So he's just a reliable bucket for the 76ers. Tobias Harris, I think this guy is an absolute stud. He came from the Pistons last year, and last year when they got this trade and they added him to a team with already Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and Jimmy Butler, I thought this team was going to go on and win the whole thing. Even surprised the Bucks, but they got stopped by Kawhi, obviously. And so it was really shocking to see. But yeah, Tobias Harris is a great player. He's right around his career high with 19.8 points per game right now. And he also had 7 rebounds and nearly a steal per game. So he just finds ways to impact the game in different ways. And I think he's a really good, valuable player for them. They also added Al Horford. He's a brand new player this year for them. He's obviously not as productive, I would say, as he has been in years past, especially not how he was on the Celtics. but he does find ways to help out the team as well. He's got a block and steal per game. He averages 13.8 points per game and 6.8 rebounds per game, which is still pretty good. That's definitely respectable, especially coming off the bench behind Joel Embiid. So he is finding a way to impact the team. He is a veteran as well, which I think is very valuable for this team. And then Joel Embiid, I talked about it. He's a stud. 22.8 points per game, 12.3 rebounds per game, and 1.3 blocks per game. Joel Embiid, in my opinion, probably is the best center in the game if we're not counting Anthony Davis as a center or we're not counting Giannis Antetokounmpo as a center. Joel Embiid is a very dangerous player who is a big body, can bounce around with the centers, can protect the rim, get blocks, but then he can also stretch it out to three-point land as well. Sometimes he shoots threes and they go in. Sometimes he misses, but he does have that in his arsenal. He has a jump shot, which is really valuable to see in a center. The 76ers have been very good, but they can't crack the playoffs is my thing. They're still pretty young. They're very similar to the Bucks in that way. They just keep reloading and adding pieces, but they've always been the team, their motto, trust the process. That's what they've been doing. Ben Simmons is in his third year. Joel Embiid is in his fourth year, pretty much his third year, though, because he didn't really play his first year. So their two biggest stars, they're still kind of growing into the game, kind of growing into the system, and learning how to win in this league. And last year, they lost a heartbreaker to the Raptors. I'm pretty sure everyone saw this shot. This shot heard around the world. Game 7, the game was tied. Kawhi Leonard takes it baseline. Fadeaway jump shot, bounces like 3 times and goes in and eliminates the 76ers and, left Embiid infamously crying, and people were judging him for that. I have no idea why. But they just can't crack the playoffs. But I think this year, they definitely have the potential to do so because I don't see anyone bigger than the Bucks and the Sixers in the Eastern Conference. I think the Celtics can be really good. The Pacers can be surprisingly good. The Raptors are floating in there, but other than that, I don't really think anyone can combat them other than the Bucks. And I think on Christmas Day, when they play the Milwaukee Bucks, it's a huge test for them. It'll really see where they are in their process of their trusting of the process, no pun intended. But this matchup is definitely very important. A lot of people don't like hyping up regular season games because it is an 82-game season. Not many people take it that seriously, but when you're playing opponents like the Milwaukee Bucks and how well they've been playing this year, it's important to measure yourself up against the best. And so if the 76ers have any real aspirations of being world champions, they're going to take this game very seriously and hope it goes well for them. And even though the Bucks are playing incredibly well this year, the beauty of the NBA is that any team can pull off a win at any given time. I've said this a bunch of times, but another great thing about the NBA is you get to watch history unfold. Some historic games happened over the last few days, and we'll talk about it coming up after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Welcome back.
We were just talking about how the Sixers have been trending up and really trusting the process this year. They've been a very formidable opponent to most people. They're making some noise in the Eastern Conference, and I really do believe they're the only team that can combat the Bucks in the Eastern Conference. I don't think the Heat have enough to sustain what they've been doing. The Celtics maybe can come back up and do something great. Raptors maybe, they're kind of floating around that area, but the 76ers, in my opinion, are the best and well-suited team to face the Bucks in the Eastern Conference. Now switching gears, there were some historic performances and historic games that happened over the last week that I kind of want to touch upon. First, happening in LA. No, not Showtime LA. LA Clippers. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are the first Clipper duo in franchise history to score 40-plus each in a game, which is insane. And it's funny because we've talked a lot about how LeBron and AD are one of the scariest duos in the NBA. And here we are, another duo who both scored 40 points. Kawhi scored 42 points and grabbed 11 boards. And Paul George had 46 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, and 2 steals against Minnesota. Now, these two combined for 88 points. And the Clippers scored 124 points total. That is insane. That is well over half of what the Clippers scored. And Harrell was the next biggest scorer with 18. And no one else after that had double digits. So talk about putting a team on your back. That is a scary duo if you're going to combine for 88 points. That is insane. Anthony Davis and LeBron James both had 30-plus points the other day, and I thought that was really impressive. But then I saw this, and I was blown away, honestly. And on the other side of the ball, Minnesota has a pretty decent squad. They've had a really good year until as of late, but they have had a pretty decent year. Towns had 39 points in this game, 12 rebounds and 2 steals, and Wiggins had 34 points. So that's another duo that's pretty respectable. And to put up those kind of numbers to combat 88 points from Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, it's close, but I guess it's just not enough, and that's tough. Minnesota's been pretty good this year, like I said, Wiggins and Towns specifically, obviously. But the Clippers were just too much. Teague even had 22 points as well that he added on. So, it was a tough contest, a tough one for Minnesota to drop. But, like I said, an historic night for the Clippers, having 2 players have 40-plus points for the first time in franchise history in the same game. That is pretty cool. Next up is James Harden. He had back-to-back 50-point games this week. He had 54 against Orlando and 55 against Cleveland. This guy is a scoring machine. I mean, he's had already a bunch of 50-point games this season, already had a 60-point game this season. He's just scoring at will, and it's because of the way that he's able to find different shots. His variety of shot taking is crazy, and the amount of threes he scores as well, also phenomenal. And he even had 50 points with just 5 free throw attempts as well. So most of the time I nitpick James Harden because I hate the fact that he finds a way to get to the line every single time and get his point, like 20 plus points from the line. I just don't see that as being impressive, but this 50 points by just 5 free throws is crazy. And he also hit 10 threes as well, back to back. And 10 threes is a franchise record. So he set a franchise record back to back. This is how good James Harden is this year. He is ridiculous. It's crazy how well he's been playing this year. He's also on a list for most games with 50 or more points in NBA history with 23. He's only behind 3 other players. He's behind Kobe Bryant, who has 25 of his own. Kobe Bryant, I don't even have to explain it to anybody. They know, because when everyone shoots a fake basket into the garbage, they scream, Kobe! So they know who Kobe Bryant is. I don't even have to explain it. He could be hailed as the GOAT. He's in that discussion. He's that good. James Harden is 2 games away from passing him on the NBA history list for most 50-plus games. Anyway, he's also behind Michael Jordan, who even more so I don't need to say, because he is the GOAT, in my opinion. He's the greatest of all time. He has 31 games with 50 points or more. And then he's also behind Wilt Chamberlain, and Wilt Chamberlain has 118 games where he has 50 or more points. So that's crazy. No one's ever going to beat that. In this new age NBA, teams are just too good for players to be dropping 50 points that often. But to be in that kind of company is historic. It speaks to James Harden's greatness. Because to be in the conversation with Kobe, with Jordan, who, these are two players that people talk about being the greatest of all time, throw in LeBron James as well. And so to be in company with them and Wilt Chamberlain as well, another great talent, probably one of the best in history as well, it's really good for James Harden to be in that conversation. He's also moving up on the all-time three-point list. He's now in 8th. He's got some ground to make up. He'll definitely be up in the top 3 by the end of his career, especially at the volume that he shoots three-pointers. It'll be him, Steph, and Klay Thompson, Ray Allen up there probably. But yeah, I could see him, combating Stephen Curry for, the most three-pointers of all time, for sure. He won't beat him, I'll tell you that much. Stephen Curry will be the greatest of all time three-point shooter. But James Harden will definitely be up there as well. So yeah, James Harden has had a great year. He's been historic. He's been unbelievably good. He has almost 40 points per game that he's averaging at this point. So it's ridiculous to see how he's doing it night in, night out. But he is a crazy talent, and he's definitely fighting for that MVP. He's going up in my rankings for sure. The Spurs, on the other hand, they haven't been as good as they are accustomed to being, especially under the great Greg Popovich, but they've had some historic run in the past 4 games. The Spurs have another OT battle. The Spurs are the only team in NBA history to go to overtime in 4 consecutive games. They had that crazy game against the Rockets where, that whole Dunkgate situation happened. By the way, that is resolved. The NBA denied the Rockets' request to try and play the game over again or get the win. They've just straight up denied it. So the Spurs keep their W. Congratulations to the Spurs. Anyway, during that game, the Spurs came back late. They found a way to push to OT, then to double overtime, and they ended up winning 135-133 in that game. Then they had a crazy game against the Sacramento Kings, where they were down by about 9 points with a minute and a half to go, I believe. And I remember watching this live and just watching the Kings crumble. They had the game in their hands for a majority of the game. And then all of a sudden, the Spurs just put together a run that was incredible. And Bellinelli hit this great three-pointer to push OT. And then they ended up winning that game as well, 105-104. Then they moved on to the Cavaliers. They pushed OT in that game as well. Kevin Love had 30 points, and the Cavaliers actually ended up coming out and winning this game, 117-109. So maybe you start to think that fatigue is setting in because the Spurs have gone to OT so many times, putting some more minutes on their legs and just making them more tired. But no, they go to another OT. They played on Saturday, and they beat the Suns 121-119. And this game is crazy, so I'm going to give you a little breakdown because it's the most recent one. Oubre hit a tying 3 with 2.6 remaining to send it to OT. Oubre's been playing really well for the Suns this year, and it was a super clutch bucket. And then in OT, some big plays happened. Mills turned the ball over, and Rubio was dribbling up the other side of the court. Mills comes from behind him, steals the ball, and sinks a three-pointer to go up by 2 with 1:17 to play. Then they're down, so DeRozan has a crazy bucket off the top corner of the backboard. He got it to go to tie the game again. And then a Patty Mills elbow jumper with 0.3 seconds sealed the game. And it was a crazy back and forth game. There were so many times where the lead had changed in overtime. And the Suns have been really good this year. This game, they didn't have Booker, which is even more impressive. Rubio had 25. Kaminsky had 22. Saric with 19. And Oubre with 17. So they've got good pieces. But the Spurs just find a way to win. Mostly behind the 26 points from Mills. And then 18 from Aldridge, Murray, and DeRozan. They all had 18. But yeah, they just find ways to win. And it was a really impressive win. And when Popovich found out after the game that he had made history by going 4 straight OT games in a row, all he had to say was, quote, "It's awful." He probably said this just because who wants to go to OT 4 times in a row? Like, that's not the way you want to make history. But he could definitely be proud of his team for, pushing through and getting 3 wins out of 4 times going to overtime. That's definitely impressive, because going into overtime, your team's tired and everyone wants to get out of the gym at that point. But they just find ways to win for sure. And another historic moment during this week, we already talked about New Orleans Pelicans going on their 12th consecutive loss. We won't talk about that anymore because poor them. So we're going to move on. Next up, we've got who's hot and who's not. I tell you my top 5 favorite teams as of right now, the hottest teams in the NBA, and the teams that are just not hot. Coming up after this. Be right back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We were just talking about some historic games and historic performances that happened the past week. Talking about PG and Kawhi going off for 40-plus each. James Harden being a man on fire. The Spurs going to a couple OT games in a row, making history for that. And then the poor Pelicans we touched on just a little bit. But I'm not going to put salt in the wound, so we're going to move on. We're going to talk about who I think are the hottest teams in the NBA and who are just not the hottest teams in the NBA. I give you my top 5 for both. We're going to start with the hottest in the NBA. Coming in at number 5, I have the Miami Heat, who have been a big surprise for me this year, which is why I put them in here. They're second in the East right now, 7-3 in their last 10 games, and they have a point differential of plus 5.4, which is really impressive. They just beat the Mavs in overtime, like we talked about earlier on in the podcast. They didn't have Luka Doncic, so it's not as impressive as a win as it would have been if Luka was playing. But nevertheless, the Mavs are a big team in the West, so for the Heat to go on and win this game, especially in OT, just speaks to the type of team that they've been this year. Butler's doing extremely well. A lot of people question why Jimmy Butler, out of all places, would want to move to Miami Heat, especially since he was in a pretty good situation with the Sixers. And he could have gone anywhere else that he wanted to, but he chose the Heat. A lot of people questioned it, but it's working out pretty well. Kendrick Nunn, we talked about in the last podcast about a rising rookie. He's playing really well this year. Tyler Herro is a flamethrower. He always makes the news by just scoring buckets. He's a scorcher from three-point land. And then Dragic is hurt as of right now with a groin injury. He's day-to-day, but he's always been huge for the Miami Heat franchise and just is a solid point guard, especially in this league. So, yeah, Heat are my number 5 team. Number 4, Clippers, who are second in the West right now. They did just lose to the Bulls, which kind of hurts, which is why they're lower on my tier right now. But they are 7-3 in their last 10 with a point differential of plus 6.9. So they are beating teams. They're playing really well, and they're still, second in the West, which is only behind the LA Lakers. So I think they're going to be chasing them for the rest of the year. I think now that they're starting to get a little more team chemistry with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard finding their rhythm together, We just talked about them both scoring 40-plus points per game. So obviously they're not going to be that productive every single night, but to see them start to kind of go off is definitely frightening to see, because they can be a team that just goes deep into the playoffs. They can be a team that wins it all. Clippers are my number 4 team. Coming in at number 3 is the 76ers. We talked a lot about them earlier. They are 3rd in the East, and they had a 5-game winning streak before losing to the Nets, and they're 8-2 in their last 10. They also have a point differential of plus 6.2, which is really good, and they just trust the process, and they don't even have Joel Embiid the last game. That's why they lost, but they've been a very, very good team, and it's going to be an even better game to see when they play the Bucks on Christmas Day. Then we can really measure just how good they are. They're number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list, they dropped down from last week, LA Lakers. The LA Lakers are 2nd in the league right now, in my opinion. They are very, very good. They're on a 6-game winning streak. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games, and they have a point differential of plus 9.5. Like I said before, they have a scary duo in Anthony Davis and LeBron James, and I really think that Anthony Davis is making a case to be the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, if there weren't players like Luka Doncic or his teammate LeBron James or Giannis Antetokounmpo, Anthony Davis could take home both. I think he will definitely take home Defensive Player of the Year if it ended right now, but he could also win MVP as well, because he just put up 33 points and 10 rebounds against the Miami Heat, a team that is in my top 5. So for him to go off like that is pretty incredible. And LeBron went off in that game as well, 28 points, 9 rebounds, and 12 assists. So they're just clicking. LA Lakers are really good this year. But the reason that they're not number 1 is because the Milwaukee Bucks are. The Milwaukee Bucks, what more can I say? We've talked about them a lot this podcast. Like I said, they're on an 18-game winning streak and a point differential of plus 13.6. 13.6. Teams aren't even getting close to beating them. They've only lost 3 times this year, and it doesn't look like they're going to lose anytime soon. There's no team that can really, measure up with them. I want to see them play the Lakers. That would be a great finals, prediction matchup, just to see who would come out on top. Some honorable mentions for the hottest teams in the NBA. I got to give a shout out to the Dallas Mavericks, because they've been a team that just surprised me this year. A big portion of that is because of Luka Doncic, though, so we will see if they can keep it up and stay high in the rankings. Another team that I think deserves a shout out is the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings have been really good this week. They pulled out a lot of wins. They haven't had their best player in De'Aaron Fox, but they still have found ways to win. They just got Bagley back. They beat the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic. He was actually playing in that game. So that's a really impressive win. They beat them 110-106. They beat the Houston Rockets as well, 119-118. And then they went on to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder as well, 94-93. In both of those games against the Rockets and the Thunder, they hit a game winner in both of those games. So I think the Kings can definitely be a dark horse in this team, and they had a really hot week. They just beat the Warriors as well, which isn't that impressive, but it just speaks to, the hot streak that they've been on, even though they lost to the Knicks before the Warriors. We're not really going to talk about that, though, because that's just embarrassing for them. Anyway, another team I want to talk about really quick is the Pacers. They've been a really hot team as well, and they definitely deserve a shout-out. They've been, like I said, another dark horse in the Eastern Conference. I think they could be a team that just shocks people. But yeah, now I'm going to move on to who's not hot in the NBA, teams that have been struggling. Number 5 are the New York Knicks. They're not number 1, so that's something to celebrate about. They are 6-21. They're the worst in the East, and they just lost to the Nuggets. They are 2-8 in their last 10 games. But the reason that they're not number 1 on my list is that they just beat the Warriors and the Kings. So they do have 2 wins in their last 10 games, which is a little bit better than some other teams as well. But the New York Knicks are not the worst team in the NBA as of right now. They do have a terrible record at 6-21. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that they're the worst at the moment. Coming in at number 4 is the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're 6-20, and they're 1-9 in their last 10 games. And we talked about it a little bit before. They're in a rebuilding process. They don't really have the pieces to be successful yet, and this is why they're so low. I mean, when your best player is Kevin Love and you need to rely on Kevin Love to carry your team, you're not going to be that great, and the Timberwolves will tell you all about that. And he's trying to force his way out as well, so it's just kind of not a great situation for the Cavaliers as of right now. And with a young coach as well, it's tough. It's tough for them to be competitive, so they come in at number 4. Number 3, the Golden State Warriors. They are just bad. They're so bad. They have the worst record in the NBA with 5-23 record. What a fall from grace. They have a 4-game losing streak as well, including to the Knicks. They lost to the Knicks. That's how bad the Warriors are this year. I mean, jeez. I know they have a lot of injuries. They're missing the Splash Brothers. Draymond's been in and out of injury. D'Lo's been in and out of injuries. They've had their rookies carrying the team, but still, I would expect them to be a little bit better, especially since they're being coached by Steve Kerr. But I got to cut them some slack. That's why they're at number 3, because they do have a lot of injuries. But they do have the worst record in the NBA. Number 2 is the Hawks. They're on a 4-game losing streak, and they're 6-21 also. Trae Young is the only thing that's good that's going on there. And they did have a pretty good battle with LA tonight, but yeah, they can't compete either. They're 6-21. Just barely better than the Knicks, only because I think matchup-wise, I'm not even sure. But yeah, they're 6-21 as well. They come in at number 2. And number 1 for the worst team in the NBA as of right now, I have to bring them up one last time, the New Orleans Pelicans. Like I said before, they lost their last 12. They're second to last in the West. They've dropped exponentially. They have the second worst record in the NBA with 6-21, tied with the Hawks and tied with the Knicks as well. So they're at the bottom of the totem pole, in my opinion. Even though the Warriors have a worse record, I think that the Pelicans, the fact that they're on a 12-game losing streak, that bumps them to number 1. It's unfortunate for them. Some honorable mentions that I'd like to throw out there as well for worst team in the NBA. The Timberwolves have dropped. They were a good team to start out the year. People were kind of caught off guard with how well they were playing, but they're on a 7-game losing streak right now, which is why I'm giving them a shout out. And the Wizards as well, they're on a 4-game losing streak, and they're 2-8 in their last 10 games, so they're having a rough go as well. But yeah, that's my top 5 for who's hot and who's not. Hopefully we can do this again in a future podcast. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, that would be great and very much appreciated. I'm Isiah Quiroz. Thank you and have a good night, everyone.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.